So officially welcome to this fourth call within the interdependence series we're doing. And the focus today is midlife, discernment, and sacred sorting. And it's myself, NikiAnne, here today with Rachel.
Hi.
And we're excited to kind of explore this terrain that's kind of taboo to talk about. And at least it was in my upbringing. I don't even know if it was taboo, it's just absent. And if it was talked about, it was framed as like I was hearing about that term midlife crisis, and it had all these materialistic connotations with it that usually, in my mind at least, it imprinted rash decisions, abandonment, radical self-centeredness that was in the name of, you know, someone's personal yes, but like maybe had a little destructive wake that like wasn't tending to relationships. And I'm just grateful for being in this place, in this community, and my larger community, like the subworld community for me, that is giving a different language to it, rewriting the story of how it can be. That's like still intense, but maybe less reckless and dramatic, hopefully. And yeah, so I don't use that term midlife crisis for me. And I'm 45, and I've felt it for some years, like this maybe compression is the energy for me that's like pushing towards discernment, that is calling me into sacred questioning, reckoning, sacred sorting, discernment. And it feels like a tunnel from, or it, I'm also hearing that it kind of can be a tunnel where there is another side of. It's not always like this, but it's like that constriction that helps create form and clarity. And so, yeah, I'm excited to talk to y'all and with y'all and with Rachel today around that journey of um, this age and stage that's in our human development, but also can be in any entity, not just the human form, but like any life form has this arc that has a middle. And I don't know what ages actually constitute middle for human average ages these days, but here we are calling this midlife, colloquially. Rachel, do you want to open up with anything as an intro for you?
I think that I would probably just echo some of the things that you said. The narrowing, you used the word compression, the tunnel analogy really spoke to me of and it's like it's a pivot point. I also think of it that way too. It's like a little bit of a hinge in life. And yeah, or a threshold, there are like so
Mhm.
many ways that we could claim it. And like, what am I going to step through this threshold with? Like, what do I want the rest of this journey to look like and hold? Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge that there's possibly folks on this call that are younger than us, that are our age, in their 40s, and also have already walked longer than us on this earth, and maybe have answers for us or clarity or perspectives that because they've already traveled past this point, this threshold. And so there's just a lot of wisdom from all the perspectives that we're holding, and sometimes it's with more maybe exhale and something to offer, and sometimes it's still with the inhale and like anticipation, like longing for guidance. And just here we are, so I'm like excited for that intergenerational conversation as well. And for those who are listening, the questions we posed to open this up that we're invited to be shared, just where you're in the world, where you would have been calling in from, maybe where you're listening from right now, just to acknowledge that place that you are in and that connection to it, as well as this question of what are you wanting to let go of or compost, or that isn't serving you anymore, that you want to let go of to make space to give life to that next thing. Like, what is the next thing that you're wanting to feed and make space for? So you can answer that question for yourself, even though you're not with us on the call live.
Having peers in your life stage, I think, is really essential. I can compare my experience maybe as a young mother, and I did, for my generation, become a mother pretty young at 25. and being the only person in my peer group to have children. And like here I'm at like another threshold moment in life and going through a completely different set of circumstances. And yeah, having a peer group, having folks in my age range around me where we can like share experience and connect with each other, I think, yeah, just like widens the possibilities and the empowerment in that, and knowing like you're not walking this road by yourself in its somewhat sometimes bewildering moments.
We'll get into how relationships and we play roles in each other's lives that help validate these different places we're in and acknowledge them. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, please keep the questions moving and being shared if they're coming as they come. And I think I have something I want to share. Maybe it would ping something for you, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an acknowledgement of that intergenerational, the gift that this community or being in community has given me, that's around gaining perspectives from a different generation. So when I talk to my family and I ask questions, the practice isn't there in that community. And so I'm not actually getting a lot of juice sometimes. So I actually have to hone my tracking skills and see what I'm seeing of my family. And so that's something I want to just name, because I know some of us choose a different family. It's like a choice family, and we kind of maybe abandon this family of origin because they're not meeting our needs for depth or being seen. And so just to say, I've borrowed what I am using and learning in my chosen community and expanding that to not lose the wealth of knowledge that's in my own family line. And it's less conversational and more observational. And so, but a question I often have is like, what is this next half of life? Like, how has it been for you? And like, when I was 41 and an elder here in the village, Alice, she was turning 82. I was like, you're double my life. Like, what do you have to say about that first half of life versus the second? Like, and I kind of expected, like, well, it was good while I was young. And it was, yeah, I realized my perspective was really formed around like what the media is feeding us of like youthful forever is best. And she said, oh my gosh, the second half of my life has been so much better than my first half. I was like, wow, really? That's so cool. And so that one experience, and then hearing from a second cousin who's in her 80s going to play bridge with her friends weekly. One of her bridge friends brought this newspaper article that said, newsflash, the happiest people are those in their 80s. And they were bringing it being like, nah, it's the ones in their 90s, because they had people in their 90s there. But like, point being, like, that's not the stories we're told. And so I've really like treasured those as gems for not atrophying in my living fully, and like trying to counter that story that like we're just all getting decrepit and drying up and just like losing all of our agility and flexibility. And so whatever, just sit back in that seat that's comfortable and find the best show you can, or whatever the thing is. It's the experience. There's many versions of whatever the story is, but so I'm like a story collector of a narrative rewrite. And that's been this huge practice that's been really essential to me, living into vitality and choice. And I'll say more about how that has felt with a changing body and energy. But I just feel it feels precious to acknowledge that like those stories are being fed to the world, and it's not just the other way around. So thanks for all those story keepers and sharers.
Yeah, I mean, I want to acknowledge the danger in those cultural narratives, I think, because the more that we hear things and we come to believe them, and the more likely they are to come into manifestation in reality, right? And there is, like, studies, like the people who live the longest lives are people who are experiencing like flourishing social situations in mid and later life. Like that seems to be like the most important ingredient. And I think we are all fed these cultural narratives that like youth is the prize, hang on to it as long as you can. That narrative of you painted of the midlife crisis, I think of that as trying to recapture youth, the rashness of youth and like sports cars or whatever it looks like, younger partners, like however it goes. Um, and I think, yeah, like in this like re-narration that's happening, like what we realize is like, I also want to name that I think it is also especially dangerous for women. And I think a lot of women feel like invisibilized in midlife, that, their beauty has faded, or, a lot of our cultural narratives also center around like beauty and fertility of youth, right? Um, but that like, what actually happens in women's real lived experiences, and I think a lot of men's real lived experiences too, when questioning these narratives and supported and having a thriving community in midlife, is that this like new level of power and empowerment and authenticity and like sense of self is what's really coming through when we like take the time to like reflect and sort and discern, and we don't freak out and have a crisis. I mean, don't get me wrong, like there are moments in midlife I'd love to freak out and have a big crisis, but that's not what's happening, thankfully. Yeah, I think I wanted to add just a little bit of weight to how the false narratives actually can become the truth if we're not careful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what people know or don't know about women and bodies. I feel so important just to say it out loud to remember myself. And so maybe this is validation that for those who know, and maybe it's like, oh, I didn't know. But like, there is these words we have of perimenopause and menopause, and um they're barely talked about in common forums, even amongst women. And so here we are in this multi-gender situation, and it feels so exciting. But so I would consider myself in perimenopause, and all that means is, oh my gosh, my body is such a mystery and erratic and unpredictable, and I have no idea what's going on. That's my like experience. And I imagine that in different ways, but I don't know how similar, that like men have their own journey, however bodily or not bodily it is, and like there's not even words for it. And so just I know ours is linked with menses and like child rearing and not, or child, being able to birth or not, and just that it's just different for men. And I don't know, I just want to acknowledge that, and that there's still likely a soul portal that we're all going through,
Mhm.
that's like, sure, connected with body because we've incarnated, our souls in my belief system have incarnated into a body and are playing through that body. And it's like getting yeah, I think this is maybe where some juice is for me, like back to like celebrating where I am, and which is, oh, I don't have all of the liberty and privilege of doing whatever the heck I want all the time with no consequences in my body. And the sense of timelessness and like eternity to like do those things. Yeah, tomorrow. Yeah, when I'm older, I'll do that. And so I'm
Mhm.
like so grateful for that, because that's actually causing the discernment and the sacred sorting, is like a true feeling, a felt sense of death, I guess. I mean, if I were to be honest, of like, oh, I feel the timeline. And so, and again, obviously I could have already died. It has nothing to do with age, and I could die tomorrow. And so it doesn't, but in what we call like a natural progression timeline of death, where it's not sudden, and it's not um no, I noticed there's lots of ways to say this, but that it's what we call like dying when we're old. We call it dying of old age, but that's actually not a thing. Um, and just that I'm now actually consciously in the preparation mode. I'm like facing that final threshold and preparing it. And so that just feels like effective use of time and focused energy. Um, and there's, yeah. So anyway, I just acknowledging that menopause is a part of that, but it's beyond that too. Um, and I like to use that term sacred sorting and soulful discernment. And Rachel, I'm curious if you use it, and if so, like what are those? How does it show up in your life? How do you engage that? How do you know like this isn't one of those moments?
Mhm.
And maybe use different terms for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the term sacred sorting came to me fairly recently, but it like fit perfectly. I was just using the term discernment. I am experiencing exactly the things that you're speaking to, but in my life, and maybe in a lot of people's lives, I think especially women, but I can see this being true for men as well. Like the convergence of circumstances that are happening in midlife, it's like, um, yes, you are feeling the time pressure, like, death actually feels like a real thing now, right? And we're looking at that, and I mean, I know I'm definitely thinking, like, "How do I really wanna be living my life?" You know? It's important to figure this out right now, but at the same time, there's also, like, this I have a new and different capacity for doing that as well. I
Mm,
mean, and
mm,
for me, part of that is, like, coming out of motherhood, right? I think another part of that is the perimenopausal thing. Yes, there is a lot of like roller coaster vibe to that and like unexpected, but I am feeling to some degree some space between my essential self and the hormonal roller coaster, or maybe some mastery of it that I did not have before. And there's some energy being freed up in me. And it's not necessarily physical energy, right? But something that, yeah, is allowing me a greater freedom of choice and capacity to realize these like goals or things that I'm focused on and what I want to actualize in my life. Um,
mhm.
yeah, and I think like the composting process is kind of something I've been in for a while, and I think a lot of people are in, right? And at some point in our lives, we're like, okay, I have this set of characteristics or adaptations. And like what is really serving me and what's not serving me, and the clarity around that has been really clear for me at this point in life. Yeah, and I sit in curiosity about where that is coming from, that clarity. Uh,
Mhm.
it might be about like, yeah, having my body and my mind more back to myself now that my children are like teenagers and young adults as opposed to like small children. Uh,
Yeah. I love Kathy linked with what you just said. She said, when you realize there are more years behind you than in front of you, you really start to live.
yeah,
Whew.
absolutely. Hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think I would feel just like blessed if I made it another 44 years. Like, whoa, like
Yeah.
that's astounding. Yeah, and I think also something that plays into it for me, and maybe these last 4 years or few years, 3 years that happened to coincide with my midlife is like, we lost a friend, and we lost a friend very suddenly. And that was yet another layer of that reminder of death. And it's like, it might not be a long march down the road, it could be a shorter one than any of us expect. And I think some clarity came from that. It's just like, okay, let's like cut out the static and get crystal clear about like where we're putting our energy and what we're wanting to manifest in the world. I know that was true for me. I don't know if that had an impact on you in that way.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because it's in relationship to my relationship to community as well, which is um like intellectually, I have been told that it's not inherently selfish to care for yourself,
Mm. Mhm.
to focus on yourself, but it's been hard to embody. And I think that there's a couple trip hazards in that. One is like I in the while at Earthaven, one of our elders was reading a horoscope, like astrology reading, like over our voicemail system. Like every month, he would share, "This is what the new moon is good for." And what it gifted me was this distinction between self-absorption and self-focus.
Mm.
And that when I'm self-absorbed, I can't see outside of myself. When I'm
Mhm.
self-focused, I can see outside of myself with me at the center. And that gave me a narrative for actually taking care of myself,
Mm.
primarily, like first, like putting on my own oxygen mask while
Mhm.
not like having a linguistic narrative and a worldview that still anchored me to all these relationships that I have so much commitment and excitement to be in service to.
Mhm.
And so that was a really big turning point of like taking that not false binary out of the equation in an embodied way. And so I think it's really important because we talk about in community a lot, um, self-care and group care, and that self-care is group care.
Mhm.
And I think we're as we're young apprentices in shedding the the ways in which that's not um d- like dis like refined in our from our parent culture, like it's really an either or binary and it's pitted against each other. Like we're I see more and more of us getting more grace around that versus swinging into the self-absorption and the isolation and the disconnect and the abandonment of responsibilities, and like not doing such huge swings. It's like I'm seeing, and we're having a lot of examples in our community, and that's where it feels really rich to live in community, is to feel it qualitatively.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, it's the spiritual practice of like living
Yeah.
together, right? I think of it that way. Like we are polishing off each other's rough edges, and like the closer you are in community, and whether that's family or whether that is a spiritual community you have, or a close working relationship or living in community, like the more your self wellness impacts others, right? And it has this like rippling effect out, and living in community in this practice, like that data comes back in real time a lot of times. And so there are a lot of feedback loops, both formal and informal. Um, yeah, that I can see. And that, yeah, the balance of the self-care and the community care. And that's really like one of the things that I'm working on right now. And, that original question of what are we composting? And like, I'm composting a lot of things. I couldn't really, and they're all like big amorphous things and one specific thing, but like um the sacrificial energy that I've carried a lot of my life.
Mm.
And yeah, finding that like that it is not selfish to focus on me. It is not selfish to say no out of care for myself and preservation for myself. And that community has a lot of needs. Our community has a lot of needs. I imagine most do, right? There's always an open space that can be contributed to. And I definitely came into the community just like ready to fill those spaces and contribute. And I was receiving like a sense of belonging or validation out of that in some way, right? Like it was still that productivity narrative that's also of our culture, right? That we're not of value if we're not doing and producing. Um, and that there's actually great value in taking time to be. And I think self care is part of that. And so here in this, like, I think it's your partner that I first heard this term that, like, the community is like a crying baby and it always needs something. And that, like, regulation mechanism is what we're all practicing here, right? And like how to take care of the baby well so it is healthy and well, but that we are also healthy and well.
Mhm.
And it's a balancing act, and it shifts over time.
Yeah, and I feel like in some um worlds the word no is dirty, and I've really been appreciating the framing of sacred no makes space for sacred yes.
Yes.
That like whenever there is a no to something, it is sacred because it's meaning that there's space for a yes for something else. And so that for me is makes it life-giving to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And as we kind of flesh this out in the community context, that question that Sabina had around, how do we mark it? How do we mark this midlife thing? And I think that's true for any threshold. Like we need markers, like a delineation, and not that it's a one and done marker. It's just an acknowledgement. That's like being seen is such the medicine that helps us evolve into the next stage. And it's acknowledging our readiness. And so whether that's a toddler, a 7-year-old, a teenager, a mother, a father, um, right now in this midlife, which obviously we don't have a lot of language for in our parent culture, and then all the way to death, elder, and then death. I do want to say that culturally, at least here, and I imagine it's well beyond here, it can't just exist here, is this term chronolescence.
Mm-hmm.
And so this word crone doesn't get talked about or used too much in colloquial ways, but more in the mythological or the fairy tale or the wisdom stories of elder women. And I love the claiming of it. Like I don't know the crone archetype that well, but because it's being used in a life stage um, ritual, in a ritual way in our village, in our community, it's making me curious. And so chronolescence is kind of this time similar to adolescence where it's that brackish water. It's like, is it still a child or an adult? Or are they still a child or an adult? Is this still a mothering, aged person, or are they getting into elderhood? And so into the crone and past childbearing years. And so there are women who are holding those ceremonies for each other and including younger women. It's not just crones holding it for crones, but really to acknowledge that it's again brackish waters. It's like it's so mysterious and it's not a certain age and it's not a certain way. So that I just want to acknowledge that terminology and those rituals that have been happening here, that are intending to create those markers in some of these threshold moments of our lives that aren't so traditionally honored.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing around that is that any of these rituals or stepping into our place require others. Like it's an inner job, but it's relational. Like it's actually in the context and fabric and web of relationships. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, that's been huge because that term elder, for me is a role that requires a younger to make an elder. And so that calls me to task as a younger to be looking to the olders in my life so that
Mm-hmm.
they can become elders because I'm coming to them. It's a practice. It's like a skill set. It's a a wisdom cooked perspective by being in a dynamic set of relationships through a long view and internalizing those experiences and cooking them into wisdom that then is digestible and relevant to the next generation and of course their peers as well. But anyway, that feels important to recognize that there's a role that we all have in making these life stages and threshold moments a part of the community fabric and potent by showing up for them.
Yeah, I mean, we're speaking of like the power of acknowledgement and also like the gifts of an intergenerational life. And we're all coming from a culture where this is broken. Like it's just maybe in the last like 75, 80 years that really like in this country specifically, like the intergenerational life has broken down and youth has been like put up on the altar of worship and the wisdom of elders has been disregarded or turned away from, and that has then become, and that there so many reasons for that that we could unpack and go into, but I don't think we're here for historical sociology lessons. I love to geek out on that sort of thing. um, but like that's what we're here like trying to remember. Like we use that word a lot here at Earthaven. And we,
Remember?
it's like Soil even has a program called the Remembering Retreat because it's so much of what we're doing here. We are not creating like an all new culture. We're not making this stuff up. Like we are looking back. We're doing some sacred sorting. We're doing some discernment, and like looking at the past and seeing like there was some value here, or like look at this culture, like there is some real value here, like look how they're engaging intergenerationally with their youth and their elders and their people in midlife. And or even like permaculture is drawing from indigenous wisdom, right? It is remembering. It is not it's not something new that we created, and of how to live um in concert with the ecosystem. Like, yeah. And so I just think that's so much. And that's why, like, we call ourselves a seed bank here sometimes. And it's like, yeah, we are collecting and trying to practice these things and bring them back into life and into practice and come up, find some words for them. Like you're saying, there's so many things like our culture doesn't really have words for. And so we're borrowing and picking and trying to put something back together to bring wholeness to our culture, which also brings wholeness to ourselves, right? And this is kind of pinging for me somehow, like we were talking about the discernment and the sacred sorting of midlife, and then like the age of our community is also in its 30s, and it has gone or just turned 30. And so yeah, it definitely went through those like really fiery, powerful, emergent, high energy days, of clearing land, building homes, the whole pioneering thing. And like now we're like, there are enough of us here, we are settled enough, we're secure enough, we're not living in tents, we have actual houses, that we can start to discern about where we want to put our energy, like as a community. What are we focusing on? What do we want to create? And this remembering, I think, is a big part of what's happening now in our midlife as a collective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is reminding me of this conversation I recently had with Arjuna, one of our founders and elders here. I was asking her about how she came to Earthaven, and it ended up telling kind of her midlife story a little bit of, and she was gifting me a little, maybe trying to give me a salve for some of the pressure I've been putting on myself, for being in the grit a little bit of this uncomfortable time of this feeling insecure, honestly, of like, I am with those questions. Who am I? What am I here to do? Like, life making sense in this place that I've rooted myself. And um one of the things she said was, oh, you're realizing you didn't save the world and can't save the world. Hmm. And she was not trying to save me from this grief that I was in. And I don't even have language for it yet. I mean, she literally just planted a seed for me that is, I need to deepen into and like be with my curiosity of like, what is the reckoning that's going on in me that is painful. Um and honestly, it really crystallized around the hurricane, when the remembering retreat of 2024 was supposed to be that weekend. So I had put all this life energy and excitement into co-creating that this year's version of a coming together and in service to wholeness of ourselves. And like literally the night before being like, okay, I think we have to call it. This isn't smart like we could get more water than we think we're going to get, and that's what happened. And so to have been in this grief process of this, I've been using this language of like unborn, this stillborn child, like this child of the
Mm.
retreat for me, and then going into the hurricane and having all this immense need, like, for those who were here in the region and maybe were listening to our stories, there was this big sense of like, this is what we're made for, like for these times, let's come together, we can do this, we are doing it. And I was just collapsed
Mm.
and like barely felt like I had anything to give. And sure, yeah, I was connected to this like unique experience that I was just building for, but it really pressed against that, like, what am I made for? It was like connected to this, like
Mhm.
really wanting to be relevant to my world and my life ahead.
Mm.
And honestly, my practice right now in this confusing times is to just keep showing up for the simple and the sacred mundane and the everyday sacred. And
Mhm.
so whether that's, hanging out with the kiddos or washing a friend's dishes or taking out my compost or showing up in a garden or like just really grounding, honestly, grounding practices that are not overly complicated in my mind, that's making time for the listening, for the like listening for like what's feeling right, just having patience. And yeah, so interestingly, like I came here in my Saturn returns and now I'm in my midlife moment. And so back to the story with Arjuna, she came here in her 40s. Earthaven birthed when many of those founders were in their 40s. I was like,
Makes
wow,
sense.
wow. So I know so many people that are exploring community are in that place that our elders in this community were in at that time. And so it's just a cool vantage point that's very different than mine, because I came here in my youth, um, to just be like, wow, yeah, you really chose into this. This was the thing that you gave life to, and you shed those other things. And so I'm with that of like, oh, what is it like to be in my 40s in community, and in my 50s and in my 60s, and how do I maintain relevance and connection with the needs that are alive, but also my own capacities that are diminishing in some ways and unfolding really brightly in other ways. And so how to like make
Mhm.
that transition with grace is my prayer. And I don't know how to totally manifest the grace part, but I guess it's to acknowledge that it's not all in my hands.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, there were a couple of different things there that you were saying that I was pinging and I was like trying to collect them in my brain. And I honestly am having like a really humbling moment right now. And it's like funny that we're having this conversation because I'm like, oh, this is what I could call my perimenopausal brain. Like some days, like I am the self that I'm used to, and I'm just like on it. My mind is really sharp. And then other days, like today, I'm like, I can't remember what was said 5 seconds ago. It's a real struggle. I just wanted to name that because we're here in this conversation and like we're talking about big things and like the little things relate to the big things and it's like the what am I here for and the reassessing of who I am. I have this like idea of myself and like
Mm.
I've always kind of prided myself and having like a quick mind and like one of the best compliments that I've just like held on to in my entire life is like someone once told me you have a mind like a steel trap and I was like yes. And like I don't have that mind anymore and like who am I now, right? And that doesn't mean that I am any lesser of a person. I'm like a shifting, evolving, changing person that has like new gifts emerging, right? And yeah, hopefully I can retain enough of this memory to serve me and to serve my purposes in my community. And maybe not, who knows? But one thing that I did like really remember, like, of course, and thank you for bringing it in was the grief. And
Mm.
like, yeah, like this is a really bittersweet time of life. And I recognize that. And I think I feel the joy mingling with the grief more than it ever has in my life. Like there is this um there's just this emotionality that is like, it's really rich for me. Um, and it had, and part of it is like, yeah, fully like I was, oh, I've got 44 years behind me. I have 4 kids and 20 years of parenting. Like I have a divorce. I have another like long-term relationship. I have got lots of regrets behind me, right? Or lots of things that I wish would have gone differently or that I'd done differently. Um, and so we're also like taking stock of our lives. And I think that this is something I've heard more in regards to men than women. And it is this acknowledgement of the griefs, and the changing dynamic in life. Like, the statistics of men, um, having heart attacks in their 50s. And this is
Mm,
very much linked to the like maybe not dealing with and composting and accessing emotions like sadness and grief, and crying and things of that nature. And there's been a lot of work done on that. Um, and that this is the time of life for addressing those things, right? So we can
mm.
move on into this eldering that we're talking about with some clarity and with some wisdom of experience, but also not carrying our baggage with us, not carrying like all the pains and the regrets. Just a
Yeah,
thought.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And just, what Sabina's acknowledging, it's not easy. Yeah, just because we know it intellectually of that we have this sacred task at hand of discernment and clarification, it doesn't mean that it's easy. And grieving too. I mean, I commit myself to be a community grief tender and holding space for that. And just because I know that's good medicine and good communal hygiene doesn't mean that it is easy to show up for and easy to hold and easy to be vulnerable with. But I think that
Mhm.
is part of the recipe, part of an ingredient in this relationship with grace is the grieving. And if we
Mhm.
can do that with others, more potency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And um I don't know how many of you know this story, the story of two old women. It's an Inuit story, and it's a very thin paperback book. It's a beautiful story. Um, and it's been a really huge teaching story for me. And I would actually love to read this in the winter as a community every year. I think that this would be really cool to help us hear the deeper layers of wisdom that's probably in that book that keep unfolding as we experience it together. So just from what I remember, it's there's these people. I imagine them in Alaska. Maybe it wasn't actually exactly there, but and they have to travel as a whole community, as their clan, to find food. They can't stay in one spot. That's death. They have to move to keep um, their food sources alive. And so as they are moving camp, as they move into winter, they leave behind two old women. And it two women who weren't even like that close. Like one was the grandmother of this daughter and grandchild who, and the other one was, I don't know if I can't, I think she didn't have direct lineage in the family, but they both were kind of not pulling their weight. And one was like quite complainy. And so they kind of got left behind, being like, we can't afford to feed you, and you're not contributing to the village. Like, you're not contributing to the whole to make it sustainable. And so the community left them. And for me, it's like rips a tear in the fabric of my romantic notion of indigenous culture. And so the story is of the two women telling their story, like what it's like, and they end up surviving and totally like being badasses, and the clan comes back around the next season and like finds them alive. Did not expect to find them alive, because again, they didn't seem to be proving that they had the skills and could pull their weight for their own lives. And so there's something there for me that is a lot to study, because I do want to, there's a part of me in a person who's not quite an elder, but wanting to grow into one in a way that feels good to everyone, including me. And I admit there's part of me that wants to be leaning back in the chair a little more and be taken care of and feel entitled to that being taken care of.
Mhm.
And there's probably truth in that each person deserves to not, I don't even know what the words are. I was going to say not work so hard, but is that it? I don't know. Or if it's working hard in a different way, but I think this is a part of that communal reckoning, particularly amongst a bunch of cultural orphans who are creating community together, not from a coherent lineage, that we need to figure out together. And I'm sure there's no destination to arrive to of figuring out together where like then it's figured out, but it's like constantly, because there's always new people coming in. I mean, this is a community that or in a village that's like this.
Mhm.
And so that influx of all kinds of life stages, but also diversity of perspectives and cultural ways is at play. So there's a lot there for me that I'm excited to explore. And it's edgy and it's so intense and it's so uncomfortable because it's actually people in our lives right now. I mean, this is me in my life right now, and so
Oh,
um,
yeah.
it's not theoretical.
No. There's a thing about parenting that I always said, like, just the moment when you've like got this under control and you've got it figured out, like the child changes, they go through like a developmental leap and now everything's different and you're starting over having no idea what's going on again. And really that's like life, I think. It's like just as we're like in a stage and we're like, okay, like I think I understand what's happening here. And then the landscape shifts again. And I think like that is what's happening individually and collectively. And it's going to be like a new practice that we enter into. Like, okay, so we've built some of these skills and we thought that we were getting good at it. And now there's like this whole other set of skills that we're going to have to build and learn. And like, yeah, you posed some interesting questions there because I feel that in some ways that like wanting to like sit back and be taken care of. Oh, I definitely have a screaming like someone take care of me inside me right now. But like in some ways like of my life, I'm ready and willing to put in like more energy. um and though and this is also pinging back to the like self-absorption versus self-focus that you mentioned earlier. I'm finding my way through like a wilderness with that. There's confusion when you haven't ever centered yourself, and really tended or cared for yourself or had that self focus, and like where the boundaries are with like a selfish act and a not selfish act. And it's like, yeah, I'm really wanting to divert more of my energy into farming. Like that is my personal purpose. That is where my joy is. That is where I most easily want to lend my energy. And yes, it has an outcome at a certain point of like feeding people, right? But that's something outside of our kind of community contribution context. Like, we have different ways that we value contribution in community. Um, and yeah, it's like where I'm wanting to sit back is I feel myself like in the governance realm and the like holding up the infrastructure of Earthaven. And I'm like, oh, like, I don't know if I want to be doing this anymore. Like, all those little excitations of all these little details that I know that are going on. Like, I feel like they might be taking years off my life sometimes.
Mhm.
um but and is that appropriate? And I've been thinking about it. It's like, okay, I step back, then that means someone else has to fill that space. And I'm like looking around and I'm looking around at capacity and who may or may not have the capacity to fill that space. And like that's kind of where I make the adjustment and I make the choice from, right? It's not purely from the meeting of my needs or purely from the meeting of the community needs anymore. It's like, okay, what do I have available to give that's needed? And maybe it's not the 100% that's needed, but maybe I have the like 40% and some other people can pitch in and fill in this gap, right? But then also it's like the ways in which we contribute. You kind of mentioned that too, and I think it's like worth unpacking. Um, And it reminds me of this thing that I heard about. It was about grandmothers specifically, but like other higher level mammals also have grandmothers, like whales and elephants, right? And the ones that have longer lifespans. And I think this also can apply to grandfathers too. But it is about wisdom keepers and being the teachers of the community and teaching the young the ways that we survive, right? And that's one of the things, like I was saying, like we don't value that anymore. Like we have a tendency. I mean, I know I've had when I was younger, like my grandparents' wisdom, like whatever. And like now they are all gone. You know, my last grandparent died last year at 100 years old. But I did have a few good years of realizing what I didn't know and wanted to know and like talking to her about. But also, like you said about your family, also just looking at their lives and like learning from that like observation place. And so, yeah, like what is our role going forward? How much do we get to sit back and be taken care of? But then also there's the stepping forward and taking care of others that's also going to be happening. And I think it's the valuation piece that's still in question. And maybe, yeah, but you know, and that's like in the story, like the crotchety complaining one, like I would leave her behind too, right? Like, and that's the thing. That's part of the like discernment of this time of life. Can we move forward clear of some things so we don't feel resentful about our lives? Anyway, that was a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really, I mean, I just, the word just keeps coming up, reckoning. And I mean, I'm really curious if any of you feel called to share the things you're reckoning with. Like,
Yeah.
you know, particularly if you're in midlife, since that's the topic at hand, but also from other stages. I mean, I do want to, like, I know I put those words of like facing death as a part of what I'm experiencing in midlife. And just as someone who's a death care worker and an end of life guide, I just really want to plant that seed for all of us to engage your healthcare directives, engage your, fill out your advanced healthcare directives. Like that's another part of the squeeze. And it's one that most of us procrastinate on, even if we do try to engage. Because we're like, oh, I just don't know the answer to that. I don't know. There's so many what if scenarios. And so we kind of trick ourselves into procrastinating more and avoiding just coming up with like clarification for the moment. It can change tomorrow or next week, but just like allowing ourselves to fully go the full distance of that thought experiment and engagement with our mortality, such that we we've we've we have something to edit from. We have some baseline that we've said, I've shown up for the full thing once. And I'm mentioning healthcare directives because that's one of the main areas, but there's also, you know, wills and trusts and whatever else people want to do with their physical material world. But the healthcare piece is inevitable because we have a body. And it's a great practice. Something about death that we don't describe in our parent world in this way, but it's a practice. Like to, if we want to age well and die well, then practice it. Like get familiar with the terrain. And for me, that's been so liberating as like, oh, I know how to do that. I've done it in all these other areas, you know, practice facilitation, practice being in community, practice being an auntie. So, oh, how can I practice death with others so that when those moments get more narrow, the emotional landscape that you're talking about, that is the scary and overwhelming and often is connected to pain and suffering, that it's familiar terrain. We're like, okay, we've been practicing this. And so whatever ways those are that are authentic to folks, feel really vital and relevant to that, for us to stay in our empowered place, even with death, even with not having the power for, you know, the button or the switch of when that threshold moment comes. We have our way of engaging it and how we're going to be there with it when it comes. Yeah, it feels like a huge community practice that's alive right now, for me, as, and sounds like with you too, Roger. Yeah, thanks for that consciousness.
I wonder if you could name a practice specifically. I feel like maybe folks might not be Thinking like, what is a practice for practicing for death and getting familiar with the terrain?
Yes. One, talking about it like we're doing. And in this way, it's coming up that like, I hold spaces where like, that's the topic at hand.
Mhm.
Like we're consciously saying, I'm showing up for death conversations, bringing it up in conversations out of the blue, within any other space too. So like, um, taking the taboo out of it, taking the wind out of the sails of the thing we're not supposed to talk about. That's just one that's really accessible to all. Like I said, engaging our documents. What are the decisions we would make? Who do we empower to make decisions for us? Which it would be in that healthcare directive. If we don't have the faculties to make decisions for ourselves in a moment. Grieving is a practice which honors that the thing we loved died or is lost is no longer available. So it's being in touch with sorrow and sadness as loss happens in our life. Showing up to a funeral if you're invited. Excuse me, let me love it. That's not rewrite. Showing up to a funeral if you know someone who died, even if you're not close to them. I rewrote that because no one's invited to a funeral. Like you don't get an invitation, yet everyone's invited. And so and that's something that's huge because it's saying, I see you, someone who's hurting. And for someone I lost my mother this year, I had acquaintances and family friends who I barely know, community members who are not in a close zone of intimacy with me, like send a text or an email. It was so meaningful. Like just that they were seeing me as a griever. Just I felt seen, I felt held. And so that role as a community member or a neighbor or someone, I don't know how people find about obituaries these days, but in our wider community, like showing up for the ritual of honoring. I could go on and on about death care practices, but those are some that feel like really accessible anywhere you are. That's all so precious. And I hear the tenderness in it and the grief. And I hear longing. I hear I just want to honor the longing I'm hearing. And I think longing is something that often isn't honored or acknowledged, or maybe we don't know how to relate to it. But I think of longing as the thing that keeps calling us forth to whatever we want to say, source, or our soul's longing, or towards mystery, towards the thing we're here to do. And it's the thing that we never really arrive at. So it's not like it ever expires, but it's the thing that it's like the energy that moves us in the direction. And I just want to say, I'm hearing you being so clear that you're wanting to go in a direction. And I just want to say, heck yeah, and celebrate that. And you said when does the arrival come? And you're not here. You just disappeared, but I'm gonna keep talking to you as if you're here because maybe you'll jump on the recording. I just want to honor that sense of urgency for that longing to be engaged, and that I think part of my answer would be you just keep stepping one step in front of the other. It's a process, and that if we're showing up for, I was really honoring your longing. But I really hear that there's this thing you're orienting towards. And I just want to say, yes, keep trusting your longing and moving towards that. And you were saying how did you get there? And I think it really is just one step in front of the other. And it's breathing through, trusting that actually that's how we would arrive anywhere. And that we have choice points. And so I just want to say you just keep choosing towards the things you're wanting at any moment in time. And so keep I use that term North Star, that star that's up there that's guiding us towards those things we long for most, and just trusting that relationship of your knowing, and things will shift. And that's how I've experienced the most dependable changes in my life, is when they're just micro moves towards, and then all of a sudden I look back, I'm wow, this really is, things have moved over 5 years. And just in relationship to age, like I just defined my 20s as so angsty, so much grit, that was so much heartbreak. And I know we're not defined by decades, but just to use that crass like delineation of time, my 30s were like, whew, there's a little more breathing room to this. Things that like the landscape's still the same, but it's not so intense and hard on my heart. And then my 40s, it's been more like, oh, I think I actually might know what's going on a little bit more and be able to drive it. And that's what I think we're talking about. And is this qualitative orientation to the parts in our lives. That quality has changed. And so, yours might have different thresholds. It might not be 20s, 30s, 40s, but just to say that, like, keep choosing towards that thing that you're longing for. And I'm hearing that you're already choosing it. You showed up today, like it's happening. So anyway, that's a little bit I want to say. Maybe Rachel wants to respond.
Yeah, I think you spoke very eloquently to like following the path and the one little step at a time. I just wanted maybe to acknowledge circumstances and culture. And I do want to acknowledge that I see a narrowing happening. I see a compression happening, or more pressure in the refinement process, I have kids that are between 13 and almost about to be 20 years old. And I see that the societal pressures that they are experiencing are very different than the ones that I experienced, in the ways that I can see where the societal pressures that my parents and grandparents faced are very different than ours. But I do look at the world and I see a little bit more chaos. I see more disconnection. I see, if I can just throw out the big ugly word, more brokenness than maybe I've ever seen before in my lifetime. And so, I guess I don't want to be too, definitely don't want to go anywhere near toxic positivity, right? But I'm like, oh, like this is a real refinement, right? Like this is a gauntlet, and like your work might be harder than our work or the grandparents' work, or it might be more productive because we are shaped by the forces, right, of life. And I'm trusting that process. Like when I was in my 20s, like NikiAnne said, like, a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration, a huge sense of responsibility. I also had two and then three kids, in my 20s. And it has just eased up like little by little. There's something just to actual aging that lends itself to a certain amount of acceptance, of reality, I guess, and working in that reality. I'm not sure if that makes sense, if reality was the word that I wanted to use, but it's just been a process of letting go. It reminds me of that question, NikiAnne, or like the comment that Arjuna made to you about, oh, so you've realized that you didn't save the world. Like, I've been still trying up until very recently. Um, yeah. So blessings on your life, blessings on
Mhm.
your path, blessings on this culture and all the forces that are shaping it. And I wish I could check in with you in 20 years. See
Mhm.
what's up. See if it's shifted for you. See, yeah. Mhm.
Well, I just want to thank you all for your time. This was such a precious conversation to have with others, not just in a vacuum with Rachel and I, which we often do and enjoy. But thanks for being with us and sharing your hearts and your presence and your time and your questions and your life stories. And I know that there's so much more that you've experienced that didn't get shared today. And I just want to all acknowledge and honor all the unspoken.
Mhm.
And if you would like to show up for our last call, that's under this umbrella of interdependence, it is Wednesday, January 22nd, and it's in the chat. We'll also be sending out some other communications about it. But we'll follow up with this for this talk in an email that has an invitation to get your feedback. We'd love to hear like what worked. Like, did we, have enough interaction? were we on point enough? Would you have appreciated a longer time, shorter time, a different day, a different format? Like anything, it's all useful. We've never done this format before, so all your feedback is really relevant to us. And if you are able to come this summer, or this coming season, we have in-person programs from April through October. And most of them are here at Earthaven, some are in the Asheville area. And it's just such a rich time to like really feel in your own body the experience of community in this way, in this experiment here. And if you can't make it, there's a lot of online offerings that are still available through the School of Integrated Living. And just hopefully to cross paths one day, one way or another. So thank you. And just want to give space to Rachel to share the closing too.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just want to say thanks for your curiosity that brought you here today, or longings, and whatever that is, and sharing your precious thoughts and feelings with us. Yeah, I just feel really honored to be meeting you all in this like digital online space, and having these conversations and sharing and being witnessed and hearing from you. And it's like really precious and a whole new experiment for me. And I just feel really grateful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Blessings on your
Thank you.
evenings. Thank you so much.
Mhm.